With the commissioning of Kaga in 1928, Japan had, on paper anyway, used up about 63,000 of the 81,000 tons allowed to it by the Washington Treaty. This is in contrast to the British and United States that were allowed 135,000 tons each. As in the US, there was considerable argument about which was better: fewer larger carriers or more smaller carriers. The only real way to answer the question was by operationally comparing them, and no, Hosho didn't count. She was just too experimental. For Japan, there was extra incentive to look at small carriers, even though they are actually more expensive per ton and per aircraft than larger carriers. Namely, under the Washington Treaty, if a carrier was under 10,000 tons, it didn't count against that country's tonnage limit. This was because most everyone considered a carrier that small useless for anything except experimentation or support duties. And they were right. The Japanese decided to go for it anyway. Being officially done with British help, her layout was somewhere between Hosho and Akagi. Gone from the beginning was the heavy guns, upper hangar, and basement hangar. She was to have just one enclosed hangar. It was relatively closer to the bow than on the larger ships to handle more aircraft, but still stopped far short, as did the flight deck. This was mostly due to well-founded concerns about buoyancy at the bow having even more weight on it. Run the hangar and or flight deck forward too much and the bow goes underwater. More on that in a bit. Also, to help keep weight down, her hangar was superstructure on top of the hull like previous ships and was not armored. Like her predecessors, she also had no island, with the bridge being at the front of the hangar. She also had only 2 elevators, both on the center line. Wisely, they were at either end of the hangar. Also gone, like her U.S. contemporary Ranger, was pretty much all armor. Also like Ranger and most other Japanese ships at the time, her frame was made as light as possible. Too light. Also like Ranger, she sacrificed speed to keep weight down, returning to only 2 shafts. The funnel arrangements trialed in Akagi versus Kaga settled the issue, and she had 2 funnels coming out the starboard side midship at the hangar level and cranked down. The dual-purpose guns were the new 127mm 45 caliber guns and were to be on sponsons just below the flight deck level at hangar level. Also gone was the lower flight deck. Remember, at this point, she had no second level to her hangar, so a middle flying off deck wasn't even an option. The lower flight deck was omitted because it would have been too close to the waterline. Besides, with the hangar lengthened to maximize aircraft capacity, it just couldn't be long enough to be useful. Then, while she was under construction, along came the First London Treaty. In it, mostly because everyone figured out what they were trying to do with her, the under 10,000 ton clause was eliminated. As a result, they had to get as much out of her as possible since her weight would now count against their total tonnage limit. So to maximize her capacity, a second hangar level was added, with the bridge moved up a level, giving her that cliff face appearance we all know and love. Along with it, the guns were moved up too, but not the funnels yet. What about top weight, you ask? Well, this is the early 30s Japanese Navy, so metacentric height doesn't apply to them, I guess. Named Ryujo, she was started November 26, 1929, and was completed May 9, 1933, with a stated displacement of just 8,000 tons. Nobody was buying it, but it was more about the spirit of the treaty than the letter. I could almost hear everyone else saying, whatever, just keep it around 10,000. In reality, she was probably closer to 10,000. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Does it sound like the Mogami class, which she was contemporary to? It should, because pretty much the same thing happened. Not only did they lie to everyone else, they lied to themselves. Her trials were a near disaster. Even in relatively calm seas, While running at high speed, she took a lot of water over the bow. Even more dangerously, she rolled worryingly. As a result, she had to be decommissioned and sent back for work. With that done, she re-entered service, with most people feeling better about her. Then the Fourth Fleet incident occurred, with the lower hangar flooded and damage to the superstructure. She went back in for more work. With that done, she was finally serviceable. Not great, but serviceable. Kind of like her American counterpart, Ranger. She actually had a pretty busy war for as long as she lasted. She did pretty good as long as she wasn't damaged. Of course, the first time she did come under attack was also the last time. Like all other Japanese light carriers, she carried no dive bombers during the war, just fighters and torpedo planes. Main armament was 12 127mm 45 caliber dual-purpose guns in 6 twin mounts, 3 on each side at the flight deck level. Armor could generously be described as splinter protection alongside her magazines and engines. Propulsion was provided by 6 oil-fired boilers, venting to the 2 funnels that came out the starboard side midship at the lower hangar level. These provided steam to the 2 turbines, which produced 65,000 horsepower to the 2 propellers for a top speed of 29 knots. She had 1 rudder. The flight deck was 156.5 meters long by 23 meters wide. The forward elevator was 11.1 meters by 15.7 meters. The rear elevator was 10.8 meters by 8 meters. Each hangar was 102.4 meters by 18.9 meters by 5.0 meters high. Aircraft capacity upon completion was theoretically 48. In reality, more like 30. After trials, she went in for work. The rear 127mm mounts on each side was removed. The funnels were moved up to the upper hangar level. The keel was stiffened. The hull was bulged to increase the width, and 1,200 tons of ballast was added. Only a year later, the Fourth Fleet incident occurred where she was damaged. Repairs and more modifications lasted from October 1935 until May of 1936. The bow was raised a level and given an upward sweep at the front to try to keep it dry, or at least less wet. The bridge was repaired, and it, along with the front of the superstructure and flight deck, were stiffened and rounded to improve airflow. Official weight went up to 10,600 tons. Aircraft capacity by the start of the war was normally 22 fighters and 6 torpedo planes. Other minor changes were made before the start of the war and her eventual loss. Mostly anti-aircraft guns, but nothing major.